Okay, so you want to bootleg whiskey legally. It's 1921, and America has just shut down one of its biggest industries on purpose. Every distillery in the country is dark. Every saloon is a crime scene, and the Constitution itself now says nobody sells anybody a drink. But the whiskey didn't vanish at midnight. Tens of millions of gallons are sitting exactly where they were, in bonded warehouses, locked, guarded, and taxed by the federal government, because Congress banned drinking whiskey, not owning it. And buried in the same law that killed the industry is one open door. Whiskey can still be sold on a government permit as medicine. You are about to become the largest legal owner of whiskey in the United States. Within about 2 years, you hold 9 distilleries across 3 states, a payroll of 3,000 people by the trade's own count, and close to a third of all the whiskey in America. In your first year and a half, your permits pull 750,000 gallons out of those government warehouses, more than $20 million of whiskey at street prices, over $350 million in today's money, moved before anyone so much as knocks on your door. Just one of your many bank accounts takes in $2.8 million in 11 months, about $50 million in today's money through a single account in under a year. And none of it is hidden. Registered, deeded, insured, taxed. The whole machine runs on a single rule you learned in 20 years of courtrooms. Never touch the crime. Own both ends of every transaction, the seller, the buyer, and the paper in between. And the middle takes care of itself. Imagine every coffee shop in the country closed by law tomorrow, while every coffee drinker still wakes up wanting coffee, except pharmacies may still sell it by prescription to the sick. Overnight, the whole country discovers it's sick. Whoever owns the warehouses, the pharmacies, and the prescription paper owns every coffee drinker in America. So, in 1919, while you're still practicing law in Chicago, you start buying distilleries. They've just become the cheapest distressed assets in the country. Their product is illegal to sell, their owners are desperate, and you pay between $50,000 and $325,000 apiece. The Fleischmann plant in Cincinnati, $197,900. The Rugby in Louisville, $250,000. Burke Springs in Kentucky, $88,000. The old Lexington Club costs you about $225,000. The buildings, the corporate stock, and 1,800 barrels of aging bourbon already inside. A school teacher this year earns $1,082, so that one purchase is 200 years of a teacher's pay. And you're not buying real estate. You're buying the only inventory in America that it's now illegal to make more of. The moment those barrels are yours, the arithmetic turns over. A case of bonded whiskey, 3 gallons, 12 bottles, brings $75 to $90 once it reaches a thirsty city. Each barrel holds over 13 cases. 1,800 barrels is 24,000 cases, and at $80 a case, the whiskey inside that $250,000 purchase is worth nearly $2 million. The business itself isn't smuggling. Nothing crosses a border, nothing moves at night. What you've actually built is a closed circle of companies that are all, quietly, yours. On one end, the distilleries, Fleischmann, Squibb, Greendale, Pogue, Rugby, Burke Springs, Old Lexington Club, Edgewater, half of Clifton Springs, spread across Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. Where barrels sit in other men's warehouses, you buy the whiskey certificates, the receipts that own the barrels wherever they're outstanding, so the whiskey answers to you no matter whose roof it ages under. On the other end, you organize wholesale drug companies, the Central Drug Company of New York, the Alps Drug Company, S&P, and a number of others. A drug company holds what the trade calls a B permit, a wholesale license, and that license carries the privilege of withdrawing liquor from bonded warehouses for the medicine trade. One case makes the trip like this. Your drug company applies for a withdrawal. A state prohibition director signs the permit, a form that simply authorizes, say, the Squibb distillery to release 3,000 gallons, permit number so-and-so. It never says what the whiskey is for. The paper itself is the legal authority. Your distillery sells the whiskey and your drug company buys it. Seller, you. Buyer, you. The tax is paid at the warehouse door, the trucks load in daylight, and somewhere between the loading dock and any actual pharmacy, the medicine simply stops existing. It reappears retail in Cleveland and Chicago and New York at whatever price a dry country will pay. The logistics hub is a farm, 50 acres outside Cincinnati, that the men who work it call Death Valley. Trucks in under permit, cases out under armed guard, buyers driving in from 8 states to carry the whiskey away themselves. Your headquarters is a law office that never closed, and you personally have never had a drop of liquor in your life. You're not in this for the product. You said it yourself once, for the thrill of the game, and because the game at every visible step is legal. Every case in that river carries the same beautiful spread. It brings $75 to $90, most of a month's pay for a factory worker who earns about $1,200 a year, against a cost side measured in single dollars. And 250,000 of those cases move in your first 18 months, case after case after case, through permits with your company's names on both sides. Unlike every other criminal enterprise in America, yours pays taxes, happily. $2.20 a gallon to the federal government, $6.60 a case, $800,000 to $1 million all told, paid at the warehouse door, because every tax receipt is one more document saying this business is real. The money comes back out as cash checks. Deposits go into the banks and come back as checks made out to cash, handed over, converted, gone. Nearly $2 million worth through your hands. Partners hold a point or two of this deal or that one, so the accounting exists only in the moment you say it out loud, and every scrap of documentary evidence gets destroyed on schedule. On the rare check, for your own information, a small pencil note in the corner. J.S. for a man in Washington, and G.R. for you, George Remus. You believe every one of those checks is burned the week it clears. Nothing in your life is trusted to paper beyond what the law requires. Nothing except the things a careful man keeps in the one name he trusts. The house, the accounts, the quiet reserves, all held by the wife who came to Cincinnati with you. No contract between you, because you own both ends of that transaction, too. Everything so far has a signature under it, and that is the entire vulnerability. Because a prohibition permit is discretionary. A prohibition director may issue one if in his sound discretion he sees fit. The whole river flows through the word discretion, and it takes something to move the discretion of some of these men. One case of whiskey, 3 gallons, $80 on the far end. This is what staying legal costs. $6.60 to the government of the United States, the tax. $15 to $21 to the go-betweens who move a director's discretion, men like Melville Sternfelt in New York, who collects $41,000 on a single permit covering 2,000 cases. And $1.50 to $2.50 on every case you move anywhere in America to a man named Jess Smith. Jess Smith holds no office and draws no salary. He is simply the man who lives in the same apartment as the Attorney General of the United States. For a consideration per case, the withdrawals keep coming. And if trouble ever comes, there will be a vigorous prosecution, but no ultimate conviction. Nobody goes to the penitentiary. That is the product he sells, and he meters it like a utility. The first payment is $50,000 in a New York hotel room, an envelope of $1,000 bills drawn from the Federal Reserve in Cincinnati, 2/3 of what the President of the United States earns in a year, handed across a table to a man who holds no office at all. Over 2 years, at the Commodore, the Claypool, the Deschler, the Washington Hotel, and Washington itself, you hand Jess Smith between $250,000 and $300,000. No friendship in it, a pure, cold-blooded business proposition, your words. At a train station in Indianapolis, he steps away from the Attorney General's side, crosses the platform, takes care of business with you, and walks back. The Department of Justice is not hunting this business. The Department of Justice is a partner in it. And that line item never flinches. When federal agents raid the farm in October 1921, the fee doesn't stop. When you're arrested, it doesn't stop. When a jury convicts you in May of 1922, you keep paying 20, 30,000 more, because the promise was never no arrest. The promise was that you'd never see the inside of a penitentiary. Now look at what all that money actually bought, because it isn't what Capone bought in Chicago. He rented a city government layer by layer, hundreds of men, replaceable, institutional. You bought one friendship at the very top through one go-between with no receipt you control. And a friendship is not an institution. It's a single point of failure with a heartbeat. The legality is its own trap. Capone's rule was no paper, so the government could never find his business. Your business is paper. Every distillery deeded, every permit numbered, every tax stamp filed. When the government decides to move on you, it doesn't have to find anything. Your inventory is already sitting in its bonded warehouses, and your name is already on its forms. The same paperwork that makes you untouchable makes you completely visible. And the move comes fast. A warrant out of Cincinnati, October 29, 1921, prepared as it happens by a district attorney whose boss, the attorney general, has to prosecute you hard because there is already talk in Columbus that he's one of your partners. Trial, May 5, 1922. Conviction, 2 years in Atlanta, plus another year stacked on behind it. 486 pages of the testimony you will insist for the rest of your life came in on an illegal search warrant. And the man you pay by the case keeps saying what he's always said. Vigorous prosecution, no penitentiary, a reversal upstairs, a commutation if not. So you keep paying. The Court of Appeals affirms anyway. And then, in May of 1923, before the Supreme Court can even take the case, Jess Smith is found in the apartment he shares with the Attorney General, dead, a revolver on the floor, his papers burned, ruled a suicide. $300,000 of protection and no receipt for it anywhere on earth. None, at least, that you know still exists. Asked years later whether you'd been double-crossed, you give the only answer a man like you has left. The dead don't speak, so what is the use of having to answer that? In January 1924, the gates at Atlanta close behind the largest legal owner of whiskey America ever produced. The government isn't finished. Its lawyers go back to court to make certain your extra year in an Ohio county jail starts only after the penitentiary term ends, and they win. The state you paid so carefully now litigates to keep you inside longer. Now let me tell you where every number in this episode comes from. The $80 cases, the envelope of $1,000 bills, the $1.50 a case, the $2,800,000 through one bank. None of it is legend, and none of it was dug up by detectives. It's sworn testimony. Yours. May 24th, the Senate is investigating the Attorney General of the United States, and it wants the one witness who paid the Department of Justice and lived. So they bring you up from prison, 23 pounds lighter, sleeping in an isolation wing, and sit you in front of Senator Wheeler's committee. And the man who built an empire on the discretion of officials spends a morning itemizing it for the record. The permits, the per case fees, the hotels, the denominations of the bills. The protection you bought gets dismantled in public by you in complete sentences. The Attorney General is forced from office that same spring. And when a senator asks the last question, you were simply in this for the money that there was in it. The whole philosophy comes back in one word: right. Then the committee asks about your records, and you explain, almost in passing, the thing that changes everything. You thought all of those checks were destroyed until the income tax department got after you, and it turned out Mrs. Remus had saved them, definitely saved them, unknown to you in the first instance. The one person inside the walls, the name you trusted the empire to because you owned both ends of that transaction. While you sit in Atlanta, Imogene meets a man named Franklin Dodge, the federal prohibition agent who helped build the case against you, and Dodge resigns from the bureau, and together they begin selling your empire out from under you. The distilleries, the certificates, the accounts, the whiskey. By the time you walk out of your last jail cell in April 1927, of everything you built, what she hands back to you, you tell anyone who asks, is $100. One asset you'd already burned yourself. In 1923, out on appeal and hungry, you'd put $50,000 into a syndicate buying the entire bonded stock of the Jack Daniel's distillery in St. Louis. 896 barrels, 40 gallons each. With your usual plan, drain 6 gallons a barrel, top it back to proof, invisible to any test, come back next year for 6 more. Your partners didn't have your patience. They drained all 30,000 gallons in one August, refilled the barrels with water and raw alcohol, and one night a government gauger, the man whose job is to taste, asks the one employee nobody had bribed to open a barrel and took a sip of water. At the trial in Indianapolis, you did something the 1921 version of you would never have recognized. You turned government witness. 2.5 hours on the stand, bodyguards in the back corner of the courtroom because half the underworld wants you dead, 24 men off to Leavenworth, and your own charges quietly dropped in exchange. Which leaves the divorce. October 6, 1927. The morning the case is set to be heard, your driver spots Imogene's taxi in Cincinnati. There's a chase across town, her cob forced over in Eden Park, and in front of witnesses, beside the park's stone gazebo, you shoot your wife once in the stomach. She dies that morning. You turn yourself in within the hour, and at trial where you help conduct your own defense, the old courtroom lawyer's last case, you offer no alibi and no denial. Your defense is transitory maniacal insanity, that what she and Dodge did to you broke your mind at the moment the gun fired, and only at that moment. The state's attorneys stand up and demand your death. The jury goes out on December 20th, 1927. It comes back in 19 minutes. Not guilty on the sole ground of insanity. The state, humiliated, tries to lock you away as a lunatic instead, and that fails too. The doctors at the Lima State Hospital can find nothing wrong with a man whose insanity lasted, by his own legal theory, about as long as a gunshot. By April 1928, you walk out free, acquitted of murder because your mind was broken, released from the asylum because it wasn't. That should be the end of the story, the courtroom gasp, the twist verdict. It isn't the point. The point is what's waiting outside the gate. Nothing. The distilleries are gone, the drug companies are gone, and the loophole itself was stitched shut by Congress while you sat in Atlanta, the medicinal river regulated down to a trickle. The man walks across the river to Covington, Kentucky, lives another 24 quiet years on the remnants, and dies in December 1952, sane, solvent, and forgotten. And the only complete map of his empire still sits where he left it, on the Senate's shelves, sworn and paginated under the name George Remus. So, do you still want to bootleg whiskey legally? Then understand what the business actually was, because it was never really about whiskey. Congress banned a product and licensed an exception, and from that moment, the exception was the product, the permits, the certificates, the discretion of officials. Remus never sold a drink to a drinker, he sold paper to a system. $15 a case to move a signature, $1.50 to keep the Department of Justice friendly, and the whiskey followed the paper the way water follows a ditch. The corruption wasn't a scandal that crept into the business, metered per case and settled in hotel rooms. It was the single largest operating cost of being legal. And the man who owned both ends of every transaction, seller and buyer, lawyer and client, criminal and witness, was taken apart by the only two counterparties he could never own: a government that can change what the paper means, and a person who knows where the paper is kept. Remember that the next time a law bans something but licenses an exemption, any product, any era. Somewhere, someone is already buying the exception, and somewhere, somebody they trust is already saving the checks. Subscribe if you want the next set of books opened.